This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
What will the coming season bring? Will we have traditional fall and winter weather, or more of the warm we've come to expect? Most long-term climatologists don't make winter forecasts until sometime in October. But if there are some really strong trends developing that help us take a run at it right now in this preseason primer, we're going to read the tea leaves. We also give another rundown of how we use weather severity indices to develop our weekly migration forecasts. Hold on, folks. We're all starting to think about ducks and duck season more each day. Listen in now and share this episode. It's our preseason primer. So much to cover. We thank our listeners that never missed a single weekly duck migration forecast last season. We also picked up a ton of new listeners throughout the summer, so thank y'all for spreading the word and continuing to spread the word about the FowlWeather Podcast. We remind you that we are the only duck migration forecast available. All other duck migration reports are just that. They're reports. We forecast where ducks are going to be during the coming week. We do not report where ducks were 2 weeks ago or last week. We predict where ducks will be migrating in the coming week using the best available information. Our dedicated listeners know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. Think about that. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks even know where they're at. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. If you haven't already, I ask you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. We really appreciate our listeners very, very much. Clicking the follow button also ensures you get alerts when we drop new episodes. A reminder that if you follow us but don't get notifications when you open your phone Monday morning, then you'll need to allow notifications so you get the latest episodes as soon as they are released. Very soon, the breeding population estimates will be released by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the FowlWeather Podcast will be ready to release a special episode within 24 hours that breaks it all down with our classic, easy-to-understand coverage. So be sure to follow us to see when that comes out immediately. Coming in September, we will be going back to our weekly format, so don't miss a single episode throughout duck season. Click like or follow to get the latest. We also ask that you let your friends know about the FowlWeather Podcast because we can't do this without you. We can't do it without all the great duck people across duck country, USA, and beyond. Okay, so let's jump right into what we know about the weather patterns affecting the coming duck season. Right off the bat, we must note that late spring and summer rains in the prairies have greatly improved habitat conditions in many areas. Places in Saskatchewan and Alberta remain really dry, though, and wildfires in British Columbia and Alberta in the Boreal are pretty bad right now. All right, all that bad news aside, the U.S. prairies and large portions of Manitoba have seen substantial rains, and in some places of South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota, some really actual pretty bad flooding. Many basins in the potholes, even the temporary basins, are now full of water. That rain did come too late for ducks to settle in these areas, right? The saying goes, instant ducks, just add water, but the timing of that water matters, and many ducks overflew a dry prairie after the near historic dry and warm winter in the prairies. That noted, it is likely that duck counts are down. North Dakota already released their counts, and all breeding pairs, all species of breeding pairs, were down compared to 2023. But let us be clear, the North Dakota Game and Fish Department has been conducting the spring breeding duck survey for 77 years, right? And this was the 30th highest count on record. The 30th highest count on record, and 17% above the agency's long-term average. So it's been worse. Much worse. Much worse. We're recording and releasing this before the BPOP results are available from Fish and Wildlife Service, but it is my expectation that duck numbers across the larger kind of traditional survey area that includes the U.S. and Canadian prairies, boreal forest of Canada, and Alaska, it is my expectation that these numbers will be lower than 2023. I also expect that overflight of the prairies into the boreal was a real thing. That means that production is likely lower this year overall. The boreal forest just doesn't have the soils and wetland conditions to feed ducklings like the prairies. This is why on the FowlWeather Podcast, we talk incessantly about focusing your efforts on conservation in the prairie wetlands and prairie grasslands region. So be a voice for prairie conservation. For a bit of clarity here, when conditions are bonkers on the prairies, yes, bonkers, I'm using that term, when the prairies are again full of water, all those shallow wetlands fill back up, ducks will stop on their way north and set up shop in the prairies. This usually happens after several years of drought, which we've kind of been in, and that water, when it comes back, releases nutrients for exponential plant and invertebrate growth. The ducks respond, and duck production goes bonkers. Duck production goes through the roof, and we have historic flights of young, naive ducks. Then, if we also get the right weather conditions in the fall, this abundance of naive ducks moves south, and we have a bumper crop of ducks for harvest. But last year, we had low duck numbers and then very warm conditions nearly all fall. That's just a recipe for disaster during duck season. We hope this year's weather is much more ducky for us all. Okay, so duck breeding pair counts are likely down, but next we need to focus on production. Those ducks that did settle on the prairies to breed should be producing a good number of ducklings per hen. That should lead to a better fall flight and possibly hunting success than reflected by the breeding waterfall survey alone. Why? Why is that? Young ducks are dumb. They're naive. And they also move south. If they do, on good weather, they end up a little bit of everywhere, often at the wrong place and wrong time in front of guns. Older ducks take fewer risks because they're simply survivors and better at what they do than their kids, right? But again, the weather in this equation matters. It matters a lot. You can have all the ducks in the world, but unless you get the cold and the snow to push them south, they don't come in abundance. Yeah, there's some that make it, but the major push, when things are really cold, that doesn't always happen, right? And it seems to be happening less and less. One of the things I struggle with trying to explain to people, having grown up in a northern latitude, is the idea of foot-thick ice and 2 feet of snow. I think if you're in Memphis South, you might not get there from here. This isn't trying to be an offensive comment at all about folks from the South, but I feel like folks from the North tend to go south, and I've been in the South all through the middle of summer. I know how hot it gets, but how many of y'all go to Minnesota in January? How many of you go to, southern Canada in December? It's pretty uncommon, and if you do, you're not really doing it in the middle of a major snowstorm. And those of us that live here know what foot-thick ice looks like. We know what 2 feet of snow looks like. And I can tell you this, when that stuff happens, ducks don't hang around, right? They go south. And when we have major weather patterns all across the continent that cover us with lots of snow and our wetlands ice up and our lakes ice up, y'all down south get a lot of ducks. So the weather matters. That's the point from this, right? Just that weather matters. Okay, right? The numbers of ducks matters, and that juvenile to adult ratio is part of the equation in your hunting success. Another part is fall and winter weather. But let us put that on pause for a second, because we also need to talk about things like the obliteration of the drought in many areas of the South and Mississippi Flyway, the hurricane season, and farm field foods for the coming year. The drought in the South has broken in a lot of places, and many clubs, farms, and public properties have water once again. I'm not going to dig into this too much now, but, ducks will likely have more options this coming season across much of southern duck country than they did in the 23-24 season. Also, Hurricane Beryl already did its damage, but since then it's been pretty quiet. But we need to remember that the large majority of hurricanes typically happen from mid-August into September, and so expectations are that hurricane season will ramp up in August and September, and we'll still likely have opportunity for tropical storms through early October. After Beryl, east to west trade winds were pulling Saharan desert dust storms out over the Atlantic. What does that mean? That typically suppresses hurricane development, so that's probably why the Atlantic Ocean has been quiet. But those winds have changed, and hurricane and tropical activity in general are rebooting right now in the Atlantic Ocean. Right now, also across the country, most river gauges are in the green, or that is, are at kind of typical flow levels. Exceptions include much of Montana, Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Northern portions of Mississippi across to Georgia, and then pretty much all of South Carolina are kind of either in a short-term or long-term drought. There's also some duck country portions of Ohio with some pretty dry conditions right now. Then the rest of the drought is kind of in the mountainous regions up and down the Appalachian chain, and there's some more stuff way, way out west in the Pacific Flyway. But a lot of this is not your typical duck country, at least in that Appalachian chain. Of course, there's pockets of dry here and there as well, but the active tropical season that we expect transitioning from an El Nino into a La Nina, that's expected to provide enough water for ducks throughout the southeast this coming season. Not like last year where they didn't have many options. This year, it really looks like ducks are going to have more options of places to go, so think about that. If you sat at your club and you were able to pump water, and when there were flights, you shot ducks, sitting against the same oak tree in the same marsh and expecting the same thing over and over might not be the best idea this year if there's a lot of water that spreads ducks out. It's going to be a scouting year and trying to find where ducks want to be more so than it was last year. So water is really forecast to be enough in most areas from Texas over to the Carolinas, and then, kind of up the Mississippi River, up the Ohio River Valley, and into the northeast U.S. There should be enough rain from this hurricane season and tropical storm season to refill any managed drawdowns. If you have a habitat manager that keeps their eyes on the weather, you should not have a problem having water this coming fall and winter in most locales in the Mississippi and Atlantic flyways. A slow westward shift of tropical storm activity is forecast for the month of August into October. So likely landfalls will be Louisiana to the Carolinas, with an increasingly stronger shift towards the Carolinas into September and October. Tropical rains in the Ohio River Valley with a northeast line of sight through central New York are expected. The prairies at this time are actually expected to be relatively dry. So during that, if we get more active hurricanes in the southeast, the Gulf Coast, and tropical storms that kind of spin up into the Great Lakes and over New York and into eastern Canada, at that same time, the prairies are actually expected to be relatively dry. And so that's going to reduce rain, compared to the past months in the prairie region of kind of that spring and early summer for kind of South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana are kind of toss-up for the rest of the summer, right? They're likely to get intermittent rains, but nothing super dry or nothing super wet. Going into the meteorological fall, which is considered September to November, there will be many wet puddles in the prairies that killed crops, right? Got wet in the spring and summer, enough water to kill crops that were planted, but dried up enough on the edges to produce moist soil plants. These areas are hard hit by hungry ducks looking for more than just carbs, but also nutrition to add by eating those natural seeds. If we get a late fall, which is currently forecast, ducks will be abundant in shallow private lands, right? Quote unquote puddles, right? So look for these weedy puddles to kill ducks in October in the Dakotas, especially if we get some hard rain events during this period that can fill those kind of shallow basins back up. So this leads up into the winter forecast, which for meteorologists is December to February. Right now, the transition from El Nino to La Nina contains a bunch of signals. But, we also just have a very warm planet right now. The equatorial heat is insane right now. But let's take a break from the forecast for a second, because we want to introduce and chat with Matt Miseciwz, who is the official 24/25 photographer of the FowlWeather Podcast. When we come back, we include the first look at the winter forecast for duck migrations. So stick with us, folks. Have a listen to Matt, hear about his travels and his photos, think about ordering some product from him, and then we'll be right back to that winter forecast. Look, folks, the Farmland Group across the Mid-South is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisals. If you own land or you want land, the Farmland Group is where it's at. With over $500 million in farm sales and growing, Gwynn and Shelby Smith have you covered. If you're thinking about buying or selling, contact the Farmland Group to access their full suite of services. If you already own property and want to build equity and value, the Farmland Group gets it done. If you're looking to purchase a new property, well, they get that done too, and they have access to some of the best lending available. Looking to sell? Get it appraised with a Farmland Group affiliated appraiser. But let's be clear for our listenership too. They also offer farm and hunt property management to create places that attract more ducks and more bucks. Who doesn't want that? More ducks and more bucks. Let the Farmland Group build value into your property. Find them today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. You're not going to be disappointed. Contact Shelby Smith today at farmlg.com and let him know that the FowlWeather Podcast sent you their way. Welcome, Matt, to the FowlWeather Podcast. We're really excited to showcase your work for the next year on our podcast and the webpage platforms.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and I look forward to speaking with you guys on what I do and as a photographer and a researcher.
Yeah, no, it's cool to have younger folks on here. We don't run video, right? We were just chatting about that, but Matt's still, I'd say, a youngster in the waterfowl world. So it's cool to have folks of, all the way up to, say, John Devney, who's really at the peak of his career, and folks like yourself that are really just starting out and have the potential to be superstars in the waterfowl field. So just so the listeners know, Matt and I aren't really strangers. I'd say, well, maybe kind of, but we got to know each other because he was interested in graduate school with our waterfowl and wetlands lab at ESF, but we just couldn't, Matt, we just didn't really connect on it is what happened. Like, I was a little delayed in talking to you, but some of that was like, I didn't have a project that fit really, well with you, which I wouldn't say is a problem, right? Because we always want to find students that fit a really good research project. And you did land in a great position with Ben Sedinger at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. So maybe tell us a bit about that progression from, finishing up your degree at Michigan State and kind of transitioning to Wisconsin.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to what you were saying about the project at ESF, it's like this field is all about timing. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. So it's the right time and right place. But kind of circling back to, I graduated Michigan State in May of 2023. And from there, I went back out to the prairies of North Dakota, where I'd spent the previous 2 summers doing some work with Taylor Linder and Susan Feligi out at UND. So shout out to them. And I kind of finished that work up out in the prairies of North Dakota. And when August came around, I took a job with Forbes Biological Station in Havana, Illinois, right on the Illinois River Valley there, doing some work with green wings and mallards and looking at kind of hunters on the landscape. And from there, after I finished that up, I kind of fulfilled my dream of going up to Alaska and working with Jordan Thompson and Dave Coons on the Brant project, which kind of came to a short end, unfortunately, because I ended up hurting my Achilles up there. But from there, I kind of worked out a project with Ben Sedinger. I actually have been in contact with Ben for a long time. He's a great guy, brilliant researcher. So my time on the Yukon Delta is not over, luckily, because I'm going to be working on some kind of associated effects of spring phenology on some Arctic goose species up there. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, cool. And I chatted with you about coming on as kind of the photographer or artist for the year with the podcast before you left, and you said, hey, let's do this in like late August or early September, because I'm literally about ready to jump on a plane for Alaska. And then unfortunately, I think we're friends on social media, and I saw that you got injured, so I reached out. And so we were able to link up with you a little sooner, unfortunate for you, but sounds like your Achilles is healing well, and hopefully you can get back, maybe not, as you said, not this year, don't push it, but you'll be able to get back there next year.
Yeah.
But you did get some amazing photographs while you were there. For a period of time.
I did. Yeah. Working up on the deltas is a pretty good, tester of people in the field. I mean, it's amazing. And so they're actually, I think they're kind of wrapping up their banding drives up there right now. So I'm hoping they finish out the season well. I miss it, man. I love it up there so much. So it stunk that I had to leave, but it's one of those things where, you got to heal up, or else there might not be a chance to even get back up there again in the future if you push it. So coming home and kind of swallowing the pill to heal and, continue on with the research in the fall. That's kind of what I had to do, but
it's unfortunate, but I mean, it sounds like you had a great crew. You mentioned Jordan Thompson. He was actually an undergraduate that worked in our lab at ESF and then went to Stevens Point, and now is at Colorado State, correct, with Dave Coons?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I want to get this
Jordan's,
right. Yeah.
Jordan's great. Just a brilliant dude. Super fun to work with. I love Jordan a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I sent him off, tried to Alaska, actually. I was pushing out jobs to students, right? And he said, hey, I'm really interested in this. And so we really worked to get him into that. And then kind of everything just snowballed from there. He's just a very talented individual and doing really cool work in Alaska. He's doing Brant stuff as well. Is that what you're going to be doing too?
Yeah, so I'm going to be kind of taking a little bit more of a multi-species approach and looking at Brant, emperor geese, cackling geese, white-fronted geese.
Okay.
Just to kind of get an idea of what's going on with those birds up there when it relates to changes in spring phenology. So But yeah, the Brant project's been going on for decades, and it's an awesome project.
Yeah, how are the bugs up there? Were you into, pretty heavy mosquito and black fly season or anything like that?
Not really, no. The wind kind of kept everything down. We had quite
Okay.
a bit of wind up there, and um, yeah, the bugs were not really bad. I can't speak for how they are right now. They
Right,
might
that's
be struggling with them, but
there's a
when I was
period
there, it was
there.
not bad.
Yeah, there's a period there I think where they go pretty bonkers. It's why the birds go there, right? It's the long daylight, and it's
Yeah.
for those insects for that protein. So let's step
Okay.
back a bit and at some point get into a little bit more as you as a photographer. But you grew up in Illinois. It looks like you kind of found a passion for waterfowl at some point in your life, obviously. You actually told me the other day when we chatted ahead of time here that you don't have room in your life to take up deer hunting because ducks are all consuming.
Yes.
So a bit of background on what sparked that passion for waterfowl and kind of the outdoor lifestyle in general, Matt.
Yeah, so I think from an early age, I grew up on a great plot of land that borders a small creek in central Illinois called the Miseciwz Creek. So I grew up hunting and fishing there. That instilled that from a young age, probably, I mean, 3 or 4 years old. I was really young. And from there, it's been just an obsession ever since. Is like you can talk about having a passion for something, when it comes to the outdoors and having a passion for something, but it's just turned into an obsession at this point. It's like I can't go a day without going out and doing something. And if I'm not, I'm sitting indoors. I'm itching to get out to do something. So it's definitely been growing up on that plot of land is instilled that in me, and it's progressed into wanting to do it as a career from a young age. So I went to Michigan State with hopes to kind of be on the fisheries side of things because I love fishing. And so I actually had a fisheries professor of mine, Dr. Hayes at Michigan State, kind of instilled this thing of experiencing a sunrise. So we went out and experienced a sunrise on campus, and hearing all the birds on campus was like, oh, I just wanted to try and identify every single one I could. And that led to, okay, well, I need a camera because I need to take pictures of these to try and identify them.
Right.
And so I ended up kind of getting into it that way, and taking pictures and progressing my photography. And I ended up kind of getting on the line of ducks, and it got to a point where I was like, oh, this is crazy. I ducks are amazing. Ducks, they're all so different. They all kind of occupy a different niche. And, I think that's where the ducks kind of came from, that and just working out in the prairies and following the birds. And that really just instilled a huge drive for waterfowl.
Yeah, there's a few real key things you hit on there is the diversity, right? I deer hunt like crazy, and I'm still prepping food plots. My stuff's looking really good, and I'm almost ready to put in like late August stuff. But I always joke that they're just big brown rectangles, and
Yeah.
right, they're pretty boring in general. I mean, again, I'm still a passionate deer hunter, but the diversity of birds, and specifically waterfowl, in the colors and the different feeding habits and how they move and migrate or don't, is what I think a lot of hunters go down that rabbit hole, right? That you went down at a real early age, and you decided to, also make a kind of a career out of it, right? So that's a little bit different. And then also this kind of side job that you kind of have worked into your life as a photographer, right? And your pictures are absolutely spectacular. We'll get into where people can see your work in the future, and we're going to feature you in like the thumbnails and then on the webpage and stuff like that. But I'm guessing you didn't go from like 0 to 100 as a photographer, right? Like I see images of you on social media with like this big gigantic Canon of a lens. So, what's that look like as far as how your equipment and techniques have kind of progressed through time as a photographer?
Yeah. That's a great question. So you don't have to start off expensive as a photographer, obviously. So I think I started out with like a simple point and shoot. And so that unfortunately did not last long. Unfortunately for my wallet, it didn't last long. So
Yeah.
I was taking pictures and I'm like, I need to get better equipment. I'm not saying you can't do a lot with that. It's just was just kind of a picky person when it came to my photos, and I was like, I really want something that's going to give me a high quality photo that I can print stuff, and which I still have not done. I still haven't printed a single image for myself, but I ended up investing a little bit into, I think I spent $1,000, which is a lot of money, on a camera setup, and started taking pictures and was getting pretty serious about it, and posting stuff on Facebook. And, it was gradual though. So I would go out and start shooting out of my car window, and I'd get out and start walking up to birds and try, doing kind of just what anybody would do with a camera.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started getting, I wanted to take the next step when it came to my photos. So I started, shooting the light is like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go sit out and go somewhere. And, that's just how it turned, what it turned into.
Well,
Actually,
that's just like real quick. That's just like that's just like duck hunters,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So it's just, this is like duck hunting. You're basically committing to setting your alarm, getting up in the morning, getting into the marsh. I'm guessing some type of camouflage to get closer to birds too.
Yeah, and it progressed to that too. Is like I'd get up and just still be walking around at 5 a.m, and then you just can't do that when it comes to ducks. So it's like I have to get in the water. I have to be in the water level at 5 o'clock in the morning before these birds show up. And it's just that. It's like it becomes like the obsession of like, okay, this is duck hunting now, and
it's hunting with a lens. Yeah.
Yep. And it got to the point where I'm like, I'm going to build my own floating hide to put this camera on in the water. And I'm going to launch it at 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up. And I'm going to sit here in the freezing cold water and chest waders until these birds land where I want them to land.
Yeah.
And, that from there, it came to upgrading my camera, upgrading my lens. I built this floating hide for $50 with a big tractor tire inner tube, and I'm throwing camouflage over myself. And, it really is hunting. It's 100% duck hunting without a gun. And that's what I said. It's like an obsession. I can do this year round, even when it's not hunting season. Hunting season, I'm out in the blind with my gun, and,
well, the spring is the time.
When it's not, yeah.
The spring really, in early summer is that time to be out there most of the time and doing that. Maybe late winter, but that gets a little tough on equipment, depending upon where you're at. Have you traveled much to get photos? Because you're in a reasonable ducky part of the world, but looking at your photos, it looks like you've probably done some traveling to the prairies and elsewhere to get shots, or has it just been during any kind of work you have, you just make sure your camera's with you?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of been both. I've chased some birds around the state and around kind of the surrounding states, but mainly it's kind of just followed me through work. And I've been lucky enough to be in some pretty amazing places like the prairies in North Dakota, and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in Alaska is like two of the best places you can go to photograph birds. So being there and kind of having photography as a secondary outlet for something to do when you're not working has definitely played a large role in me getting the photos I've gotten. So, and it all comes with putting the time in too. It's like, sure, you get lucky sometimes, but nobody really sees all the time you put in when you're sitting there chest deep in freezing cold water and you don't get anything. So
yeah, and you probably what I've always loved about my time doing behavioral studies on ducks, and I've done a lot of that over the years, is that you end up seeing stuff that you probably normally wouldn't if you just went with binoculars and like drove around a refuge or birded along a lake, right? And
sure,
took that few minutes. But when you have to sit there for an hour to 2 hours to observe birds, you learn a lot more about them, I think, right? And I think as hunters, we tend not to do that too much. Probably not as much as we should, to just really observe birds and learn from them. But when you're behind the lens, you don't have a choice, right? That's part of the game, is having to be there for long periods of time to capture those pictures.
Yeah, and that's something I look forward to too, is like when you're sitting there and you have nothing to do other than sit and wait. It's like you observe some pretty cool things. Like even just, one thing I could think of is one time I was sitting in the water in my hide, and it's like you hear some rustling around, and there's a least weasel chasing a rabbit right on the pond's edge. It's like, it's just stuff you just don't see unless you're out sitting in the elements. And sometimes it sucks. Sometimes you got ice forming around you while you're sitting there, and that sucks, but that's just how it is. If you want to get some serious images, and all depends on how serious you are in it. So it's really, really rewarding too. It's especially since
we'll put up a picture of you on the webpage as the 2024-25 photographer of the year for us, and people can see what your hide looks like, because I've seen some of those images on social media from you, and it's a pretty cool setup. It looks like you've got like a camo duct tape all around your lens too. Is that something you have as well?
Yeah, it's like a neoprene cover that goes on there that kind of helps a little bit with waterproofing. But yeah,
so it's more technologically advanced than camo duct tape. It's actually a neoprene cover. Okay.
Yeah, I have seen folks put duct tape on there, that like camo duct tape, and it works just as well. My lens is completely white, so it'll stick out like a sore thumb if not. But whatever works. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to spend a ton of money to be good in this hobby, because I got buddies who are $500 in, and they take great photos. So
yeah, it's pretty varied, and we've got a pretty good Nikon right now, and we went on vacation to like Newfoundland and got great photos, and at some point like buggered up all the settings, and I haven't touched it since, because it's been frustrating to me. I'm a normal dude that never reads the directions, so I just like think I can problem solve it on my own. And I keep making every image worse, I think, but the auto settings on these things are interesting nowadays, and it's easier to get photos than it ever used to be.
Sure.
But this is also an asset for you as a graduate student. I don't know how many times I've asked my students, like they're towards the end of their degree and they're putting together like their thesis or dissertation presentation. And I'm like, hey, you should put a few more pictures, a handful of photos in here that, are more representative. And they're like, well, I don't have those. I'm like, you spent 2 years in the field, and you literally have a camera phone, by the way, too. And you didn't. I think they get so busy collecting data and doing whatever they have to do technically that they forget to take those photos. But I don't think that's going to be a problem for you for the most part.
Yeah.
So
I hope not. If I'm fortunate enough to get and use some of my own photos in my research, I think that would be pretty awesome. I've taken some, I haven't taken some, but I've provided some photos for some PhD students to use. And it's one of those things that like people are really fortunate for, which I really appreciate, and I appreciate them using my photos and everything. And like I said, I really look forward to hopefully doing it for myself in my own project. That would be pretty cool.
Well, it's a way also to get people really connected with the birds. When you take those close-up images you do, and, folks will see them if they go to your webpage. We'll talk about that later, and they'll see them as the thumbnails and things. But it gives you much more of a glimpse of that bird that you would almost never get, right? You'd never get it that well with binoculars because the birds are moving. You never get that detail even with a spotting scope, maybe sometimes, right? And once they're, if you're hunting and once they're dead, you've got them in hand, but you're really capturing them in their element. And I think that brings people closer to the birds too. And it's just a positive note for conservation as well, Matt.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that drives that obsession I was telling you about, is like, nobody sees this kind of thing unless you're doing exactly that. It's like, you don't see the interaction between, two Drake teal fighting over a hen that's a couple yards off in the reeds, and it's like you don't see that, and I'm lucky enough to be able to capture those things with just a click of a shutter button. And just putting in that time to do that can create kind of, a really, really like bright conservationist, I think, because if you get out there and you're looking through, binoculars at ducks, that's one thing. That is a great experience in itself, but getting within feet of them and watching them kind of, undisturbed, I would say, watching them perform their daily duties, it's something you just can't describe. You got to do it for yourself.
Something every person should do, I'm just saying every person because this is an amazing animal, is watch ruddy ducks during the breeding season. Get to the prairies and go hang out with ruddy ducks. People tend not to shoot a lot of them, most people, right? Yeah. And they're not in their breeding plumage, but my goodness, that display by ruddy ducks and how much the males fight with each other is an amazing experience. I remember being in Northeast South Dakota and just spending hours sitting in the cattails and watching. And that I never got anywhere near you photography wise, but I still have a lot of pictures I continue to use in classes and things from way back when. And ruddy ducks are just spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and that's another one that's just that. It's like you get close enough to a ruddy duck and he's doing his little display of beating his bill on his chest, and you can feel that in the water, which is pretty crazy. It's wild, I mean, they're an awesome duck. Highly underrated. I think they're super cool.
My wife's got a ruddy duck tattoo on her foot, on like kind of up her ankle a little bit. Yeah, it's her favorite bird. So I think to the point that she said we were down in Mississippi on catfish ponds and we could shoot them down there. They were around a little bit, and she's like, I just don't. She's like, I love shooting ducks, but I don't think I'd ever really have a need to shoot a ruddy duck.
Yeah, they're great.
You don't have to, but yeah, they're such a cool bird. So you're kind of at the beginning of your career as a waterfowl biologist. So what's the ultimate goal? And maybe better yet, this will be a two-part question, I guess, is what would you tell kind of undergraduate students looking to focus on grad school and kind of that waterfowl wetlands research area? Like how would you prepare? So first, where are you headed? And then, a little bit of advice. Even, I mean, you're super young in your career. I feel like I give you advice, but that's fine. We'll flip the cards here for today. No problem. But so go ahead and fire away at that, Matt. I think that's a fun question. We have a lot of student listeners actually, so I think this might really help people out.
Great. Yeah. That's also just so crazy to be trying to give people advice at this point, but I'll give it, I'll give it my all. So I think for me right now, the path I want to try and stick to as close as I can. I'm doing my master's at UW Stevens Point with Ben Settinger. That's going to occupy the next 2 years of my life. So kind of building my arsenal as a researcher and learning a lot of things there can hopefully prepare me for the future after that, which is going to be hopefully trying to spend the next 4 years getting a PhD. And
good for you.
Moving on to, I would love to be able to teach and be kind of a PI of some sort in terms of building a foundation of waterfowl conservationists for the future, because there's a lot of things that are going to be going on in the next 20 years, the next 50 years that we can't even see from this point. So building a foundation and a program through something like being an endowed chair, waterfowl and wetlands chair like yourself and everybody else with the stuff that DU's got going on is really a dream to me. And having an impact on students and an impact on waterfowl conservation is something that I strive to do. So,
well, let me stop you there because you're way ahead of where I was at your age. I didn't see anything that I'm doing coming, right? This podcast, right? My little brother and I kind of hatched the idea and I'm like, should we do this? We're like, oh yeah, let's do it. Like it's all organic, right? I didn't plan years ago to do a podcast. It just kind of was a thing there was a little bit of space in my life and we had already been doing the migration forecast stuff and there was a way to do it and we just did it. But I never planned on going on to do a PhD, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, my background's not even wildlife. It's in forestry. I have a minor in wood products engineering. And I worked in the, yeah, right, exactly. I worked in the timber. I worked in the timber industry for a while. Like all my wildlife stuff up until I did my master's was like self-taught and made it fun, right? I always, the students I have now, I'm like, man, you're so lucky. You've got all these specialty courses and things. Like you're getting all this information in a timely manner to go and be a fantastic wildlife biologist someday. But you have a lot of, that's a lot of maturity to think about that ahead of time. I probably still don't think I'm that mature, but to put that, but also let it develop organically because things are gonna, as you said, like what are the challenges going to be in 20 years? I get T-boned daily by stuff that I didn't even see coming. Right. And so just, that's about being a problem solver and taking any good lead you get, and making the best of it and working hard and working with good people, which you're already surrounding yourself with fantastic people. So, yeah, good on you. So the comment of like how to prepare, because obviously I didn't prepare well for any of this. It just kind of happened. But it sounds like you have. So what's the advice there?
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Membership means more with American Express Business Gold. Earn 4 times membership rewards points in your top 2 eligible spending categories every month, including eligible U.S. advertising purchases and select media, and U.S. purchases at restaurants, including takeout and delivery. What are you waiting for? Get the card that flexes with your spending every month. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm going to contradict my own statement of everything and just kind of start by saying you don't need to stick to a plan. You can let things go organically and kind of let it figure themselves out.
Well, like you wanted to do fish stuff, right? You wanted to be a fish squeezer for a while. So
unfortunately, no hate to them.
It's
but
fine.
I grew up fishing. I'm like, I can't turn this into a job. I like fishing and that's it. Like, it's not going to be any more than that. So, even from the beginning, it's like, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And right now I feel like I'm at a point in my career where I can start planning and start having goals like that are going to be a little bit more relevant in the future. But still, it still could be up in the air on how things fall because, I think I'm trying to play my cards right in terms of timing of getting things done in a fairly close timeline to what I plan on. And if that lands me teaching and being in a endowed chair somewhere, that would be the dream. But if that doesn't work and I end up, managing or doing something in a biologist position, that's great too. As long as I can get hands-on work in the waterfowl field and kind of play a role in future conservation of ducks, I'm all game for it. But like I said, tentatively, that's the plan.
Yeah, well, maybe maybe you'll come study with us yet if you're going on to do a PhD. But if your heart's set in Alaska, we haven't been there yet. But we're
I like as long as I can apply the concept. It doesn't have to be in Alaska, but Alaska kind of has my heart right now because it's an ever-changing ecosystem up there with so many diverse species that I really have a love for. So, but you never know. I love the prairies as well. North Dakota is a very special place to me, and watching duck production over 3 years up there has just been something else. It's just built my love for ducks. So
Yeah, I say to folks all the time, and people just they go there in the fall, but they don't go in the spring and the summer. And it changed me as a person to spend a summer in South Dakota. And then a shorter season, I worked with Delta in North Dakota and Manitoba, but that was over like a month and a half kind of technician position. The next summer I was like 6 months in. I'd say it was almost 6 months in South Dakota. It changed me as a person, and it really gave me a complete respect for the prairies and all of the challenges on the prairies too, for the people that are there, and then the landscape change and the challenges for the ducks and for conservation as well.
Yeah, it's something else. It's constantly changing. You either have a wet year, a dry year, or in between. It's just, it all drives duck production, which is crazy. So.
Yeah, I mean, we get a bunch of birds in the east from the east, but we're still pulling birds from the prairies. I mean, it is the breadbasket of ducks in North America by far, and why everybody's focused on it. So, but Matt, thank you for being with us and being the Fowl Weather Podcast official photographer for the 24-25 season. We're going to highlight you and your work on our webpage, and we're going to use your work in our thumbnails that are kind of, if you go to Spotify or Apple, those thumbnails that are on there over the next year. So maybe you want to tell folks where to find your work if they were looking for you specifically. And I kind of encourage folks to purchase photos from Matt. They'd make great Christmas and birthday gifts, as well as just great images for the camp and the office and the home. And the intent here is, support Matt, right? He's trying to get through grad school. And I used to eat ramen noodles and take vitamins and, chug a beer once in a while. But the nutrition was low because the paycheck wasn't great. But you're getting a degree that's going to advance you. So if folks can, once Matt tells us where his webpage is at, go ahead and give it a visit. And pick some stuff up as some gifts or some images for your camp, your office, or your home from Matt. So go ahead, Matt. Let her rip.
Yeah, thank you very much for that promotion. My website is the wildlookphotography.com. I started the Wild Look probably it's been a few years now, and just kind of the Wild Look came from me just trying to get different looks at stuff than other people have gotten. So I try and capture a little bit of a different feel in my photos than anybody else does, or at least I try to.
It's a great name, I think, right? Like it's super catchy, and it kind of fits with your philosophy, as you said, right? Of trying to find those birds in their natural element, maybe, and capturing them a little bit differently than how other people do. So cool stuff. Yeah.
So they're in Facebook, Instagram. It's just my name, Matt Miseciwz. Usually if you want a little bit more of a story behind a photo, I have that going on Facebook or Instagram. So if you want to check those out and read a little bit, you're more than welcome to. But my website, thewildlookphotography.com. Check it out. You don't have to buy anything, take a look. I just post images for myself. But if anybody wants to check them out, just take a look as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to encourage people to purchase stuff, obviously, right? But you've done some contract work too, haven't you? You said something for DU. Have you you haven't made a DU magazine cover or anything yet, have you? Or?
No, I have not made a cover yet. I haven't really, there hasn't been many covers that I've had images, because they send out a kind of a needs or a wants list through DU. And, I got hooked up with shooting for DU back in my first year on the prairies in North Dakota through the Great Plains office. And, I've got to meet the great folks at the DU regional office and, even at headquarters. And Derek Christian's coming out from Campus Waterfowl has been really great in promoting my photos for DU. And, I've had some photos in magazines and stuff, but I'm still after the cover at some point.
Here's what I'm going to do real quick for you, Matt, is I'm going to encourage Delta and DU to look at your photos and then put out an ask that fits one of your photos so that you can get it. So let's see if we can give that little nudge and help you out there through the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm still looking for that. I've had a couple covers, but not for DU or Delta. So I am looking forward to that at some point, hopefully.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thanks, Matt. And we're going to get back to the weather stuff that's in the rest of this podcast. Thanks for joining us as like a little intermission here and introducing you, and best of luck healing up and with your studies. And thank you for bringing, ducks alive in your photos for us all.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you, Dr. Mike. Look forward to listening to the podcast continually. It's a great one. Really enjoy it.
Thank you. We get a lot of student listeners, and so we try to put content in there that's kind of influential for people's careers, and hopefully this is one of them. You're going to be, if you continue to follow your path, you're going to be mentoring, an abundance of students over the years. So this is a good start, I think. Thank you, Matt.
Really appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, let me take a second and tell you about Wildlife Strategies, a top-of-the-line wetland habitat management company. Founder Ryan Delaney knows his stuff. With a degree in wildlife management from Mississippi State University, Ryan uses science-based solutions to create duck hunting properties that deliver results. On the FowlWeather Podcast, when we say, "May your skies be filled," well, Wildlife Strategies does just that, fills your skies with ducks. The Wildlife Strategies team sees your property through from the initial assessment and development of a 3-year timeframe management plan through annual check-ins and course corrections as needed. Don't want to deal with contractors or agencies like USDA, NRCS? No worries. Wildlife Strategies does all the contacts for you. Also included are seed and supply procurement, hunt management guidance, access to cutting-edge technology via agricultural drone, and expert mapping and aerial photography. Opting into the 3-year plan for an annual fee gives your duck property a leg up on others. Contact Ryan Delaney today at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. You're not going to be disappointed you did. Fill your skies with ducks with Wildlife Strategies. All right, and we're back with the winter forecast. Because you're going to hear a bunch of forecasts, some that already came out, I'm going to cut through the BS for you. Please remember that the FowlWeather Podcast produces the only science-based migration forecast. Any forecast projection coming from anything that looks like it's produced by the ski and snowboard industry is certainly biased. If you're getting forecasts from a place focused on skiing and snowboarding, they are trying to sell season passes, period. I've never seen a forecast from companies invested in the ski and snowboard industry that says, it isn't going to snow this year. Also, the Farmer's Almanac is voodoo and no better than random chance. The reality is that most long-term forecasters now have a 75 to 80% accuracy in predicting the general trend in the winter weather. Is it going to be warmer than normal or colder than normal? So best bet is to listen to real science and not voodoo that never tells you their statistical model. They don't tell you their statistical model because it doesn't exist, and the Farmer's Almanac is simply sold as entertainment. So we're going to talk science and reality. The transition from El Niño to La Niña is a bit up in the air, mostly about the intensity of the La Niña. The development is not as questionable, but we will likely have a weak La Niña for winter 2025. What does this typically mean? In simplest terms, La Niña is a colder than normal Pacific Ocean sea surface temperatures in an area which has predictable effects on winter weather in North America. Typically, the Pacific Northwest gets pounded with rain. It also typically gets colder through the prairies and upper Midwest, into the Great Lakes, and also the Northeast U.S. And then wetter in an area across about Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, which is good news for those folks that are a little dry over there. But the South tends to be drier and warmer, especially over large portions of Texas. This seems at odds with my earlier comment about us having enough water, but remember that the hurricane and tropical season is late August, September, and October, so be prepared to catch water in those southern latitudes and hold it. Don't expect to catch water later because the likelihood of a dry and warm, that is warmer than normal, winter for the southeast is greater. So catch your water when you have the opportunity in, for you, what is considered the early fall before the ducks show up, to make sure you have it going into your 2024-2025 season. So as we transition from El Niño to La Niña, we have a better chance for a colder winter. But the current expectation is that we will enter fall pretty slowly. So I'd expect a warmer than normal fall, kind of into at least, October, November. December has really good possibilities of a couple good cold fronts that'll make good duck movement south. But then January is expected to moderate. Kind of moderate before that La Niña socks into its strongest effects. And with any luck, that'll help bring heavy snows and cold to the prairies, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast U.S. The cold, I would say, has a really high likelihood, but the snow forecast still really remains up in the air. But at least it looks like we have better conditions in the coming February for it to be cold enough for good snows to occur. But more on the snow front later. It's just a little too early to talk about what types of snow events we might have in the major areas of the breeding grounds that need water. But remember that really cold October event last year? It was like around the 23rd to 28th. We put some graphs up on social media, and you can see that effect kind of last season. We also kind of compared to 2022. And then we just picked like 1985 just for effect of like what a cold winter, fall and winter would look like. So have a peek at that. But you can really see that cold event in October. I mean, my wife was stuck trying to come back from Montana with a mule deer in a cooler and stuck there in a snowstorm, right? So couldn't fly out. So there was that event in late October. But if there's going to be any major exodus of ducks this year, I'd expect it to be more in November, kind of from the Dakotas region. I think that's the time when we see major movements of ducks out of the U.S. prairies this year. I'd expect like a trickle migration in October, kind of out of southern Canada and the U.S. prairies. But honestly, we're a good way out from that too, of what I would call quality models with greater confidence. But I just thought I'd do some reading of the tea leaves that really seem to be in the cards of what's going to happen. But right, here's the really good news though, is it's highly unlikely that we're anywhere near as mild as last year weather-wise. And there's a better likelihood of February and March snow in the prairies to help with breeding season conditions for spring and summer 2025. So I'd say things are looking up, folks. So hang in there, and we'll get there. So a bit of summary here before we get into kind of more weather severity index stuff. Drought is better than it was last year in many areas of the Mississippi Flyway at this time, and it's expected that ducks will have a lot more options for places to go and find food in the coming fall and winter. The hurricane and tropical storm season is expected to ramp up in the coming months, which will likely provide scattered but large amounts of water on the landscape to supplement what is already available. The extreme wet in the prairies this spring and early summer drowned some crops in some places, which has the potential to provide moist soil foods as they migrate south. That, coupled with abundant water in some places and a predicted late entry into the cool kind of fall weather, suggests a delayed migration early in the season. Later in December, it's expected that there's going to be some good cold shots. But those ducks may be spread out depending on the water on the landscape that comes from the tropical storm season. January has the potential to be a big warm-up, kind of the opposite of last year. That all said, following the weekly duck migration forecast on the FowlWeather Podcast is going to be key to picking your best days to hunt. All right, let us end this with a summary of how we make our migration predictions and some exciting news of a new experimental forecast for the coming season. First, because we continue to pick up a bunch of new listeners and not everyone has had the chance to go back and listen to all the episodes, if you want to know how we use weather severity indices to forecast duck migration each week, go back to episode 8, Predicting the Grand Passage, and then also listen to episode 6, A Tale of Two Migrations. Today, in brief and easy to understand terms, we explain what the Weather Severity Index is. We use published science on weather predictors of the timing and intensity of duck migrations to make our predictions. These Weather Severity Indices, or WSI, have been published in the Journal of Wildlife Management, the Journal of Climate, and the Wildlife Society Bulletin over the years. The WSI uses temperature and snow data, and after some threshold in weather severity, duck movement out of an area is predicted, and presumably they will show up at locations further south. We used published models for mallards, black ducks, pintail, gadwall, widgeon, green-winged teal, and shoveler, which all migrate under different sets of weather circumstances because of their differences in body size, or how well they can tolerate cold, and how they feed. For example, a mallard is going to stay longer as the weather becomes increasingly severe because it's a pretty large duck, and they also field feed, so it often takes cold and snow to make them move south. In contrast, a shoveler eats nearly entirely in wetlands and is not that big of a duck, so it reacts to temperature and doesn't want to get caught in the ice, so it moves much earlier, very often ahead of freeze events. To be clear, I'm typically actually the lead author on the research we use and have been working on duck migration modeling in some shape, manner, or form now for over 20 years. So to produce the duck migration forecast each week, we use weather data from throughout the central, Mississippi, and Atlantic flyways in the U.S. and Canada to calculate the weather severity index and the likelihood of duck migration into your area. We also produce 2 seasonal forecasts, one in September and another at the end of October, with the end of October seasonal forecast being the most accurate. If you're interested in how well we predicted last year's migration, go back and listen to episode 29, Where Were the Ducks? The duck season recap. Now here is the big news. For 2024-2025 season, we will unveil what we are calling an experimental migration model for lesser scops, some of y'all might call them bluebills, canvasback, and ringneck ducks. It's experimental because it's not yet published in a scientific journal, but we feel pretty confident in our capacity to predict kind of timing of large-scale movements of these diving ducks. We're going to dedicate an episode sometime before October to explaining these models as well. In addition, among our most common questions we get is, why don't you produce predictions for the Pacific Flyway? Well, to date, none of our analyses specifically use waterfall surveys or weather data for anywhere west of the Central Flyway, so we're a little hesitant to make these predictions. That said, if anyone knows any state agency or nonprofit, I don't know, maybe the California Waterfall Association, that'd be interested in funding such work, we'd gladly use, my other hat as a university professor to fund graduate students to kind of complete that work, right? But my expectation is that ducks react similarly to weather across much of this continent, and so we're flirting with including some notes on the Pacific Flyway migration into our migration forecasts. Again, they'd be classified as experimental rather than operational, kind of like those, the operational ones we produce for the other 3 flyways. But if we do start forecasting for the Pacific Flyway this coming season, we would hope that we get some feedback from our listeners about how well we forecast timing of ducks showing up into your area. Wow, we covered a lot of ground about the weather and how it might affect our season coming up in 2024-2025. We introduced Matt Miseciwz as the official podcast photographer for the 24-25 season. All right, I'm going to take a sidebar there again. Check him out at The Wild Look Photography and contact him to order prints as gifts and for camp, the home office, and home. We also unveiled the new diving duck model for this coming season. We're starting to think about the Pacific Flyway and producing forecasts farther west. But man, let me tell you, mostly I'm just really looking forward to cooler weather. That first honk of geese, the flash of those blue wings across the marsh, the call of a hen mallard, a wet dog, hot barrels, and gun smoke floating on a heavy dew in the morning on the marsh. To all my friends across duck country, I'm starting to get goosebumps thinking about wings ripping the sky. All those sunrises to come and the stories we're going to tell, both true and stretched. But I'm also just profoundly excited for another duck migration season and helping you pick the best days to hunt. We help you at the FowlWeather Podcast. We help you pick the best days to hunt. Thanks for being a dedicated listener. We really appreciate y'all. And to finish up, we're going to let Matt Miseciwz take you out with the tagline.
May your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.